For most of human history, giving birth was not just painful. When most people imagine childbirth before anesthesia, they usually picture something very simple. They imagine a woman lying in bed, surrounded by family members, experiencing a painful but familiar process. The baby is born, everyone is relieved, and life continues as normal. That image appears in movies, paintings, and historical dramas. The problem is that it leaves out the most important part of the story. For much of human history, childbirth was not viewed as a routine event. It was viewed as a serious test of survival. Women did not enter labor expecting comfort. Many entered labor knowing there was a real chance they might never see their family again. Today that sounds extreme, but for centuries it was simply reality. In many places, childbirth was one of the leading causes of death for women during their adult lives. A healthy young woman could survive disease, famine, accidents, and hardship, only to die while bringing a child into the world. That possibility was so common that many families treated labor with the same seriousness that people reserve for major surgery today. Some women prepared for childbirth by organizing their belongings and settling family matters beforehand. Others gave instructions about their children in case they did not survive. What makes this even more surprising is that many of these women were not sick. They were often healthy and strong. The danger came from the process itself. A labor that seemed normal could suddenly become life-threatening. A baby could become stuck. Heavy bleeding could begin without warning. An infection could appear after delivery. There were countless ways for things to go wrong, and doctors often had very little ability to stop them. The strange part is that modern people tend to focus only on the pain. The pain was terrible, but pain was only one piece of a much larger problem. The real fear came from uncertainty. Nobody knew how long labor would last. Nobody knew what complications might appear. Nobody knew whether the mother or child would survive until everything was over. In many communities, women learned about childbirth from older relatives long before becoming mothers themselves. They heard stories that stayed with them for years. They heard about difficult births that lasted for days. They heard about babies who never cried after delivery. They heard about mothers who left home healthy and never returned. These stories became part of everyday life. They were not rare tragedies discussed for generations. They were events that families witnessed again and again. Even wealthy women often faced the same risks. Money could provide a larger house and better food, but it could not guarantee a safe birth. Some of the most powerful women in history suffered dangerous pregnancies.
Queens, nobles, and aristocrats faced the same biological challenges as everyone else. A title could not make labor easier. A fortune could not remove pain. In fact, historians have found countless examples of royal families worrying intensely whenever a pregnancy approached its final weeks. The birth of a child could determine the future of an entire kingdom, yet nobody could fully control the outcome. Another misconception is that doctors were always present during childbirth. In reality, for much of history, many births happened without a physician. Midwives played a central role because they had practical experience gained from helping countless mothers. They often knew far more about childbirth than educated doctors, who rarely attended deliveries. Families trusted them because they had seen real births with their own eyes. Yet even the most experienced midwife faced limits.
She could offer support, guidance, and comfort, but she could not eliminate severe pain or solve every complication. This created a situation that now seems difficult to imagine. Childbirth was one of the most important moments in a family's life, yet the people involved often had very few tools available when something went wrong. As the centuries passed, people developed countless ideas for making labor easier. Some relied on herbs, others relied on alcohol. Some followed traditional remedies passed down through generations. Many of these methods offered little real relief. A few may have reduced discomfort slightly, but none could remove pain in a reliable way. Women continued facing labor with essentially the same challenge their ancestors had faced hundreds of years earlier. That is why one detail surprises many people today. For most of history, the question was not how to make childbirth painless. Most people never imagined true pain relief was even possible. They viewed labor pain the same way people viewed storms or earthquakes. It was simply part of the natural world, something to endure rather than eliminate. This belief became so common that entire societies built expectations around it. Women were expected to be brave. Families were expected to accept risk. Communities were expected to treat suffering as normal. Few people stopped to ask whether the pain itself could someday be removed. Yet while millions accepted this reality, a small number of people were beginning to challenge assumptions that had existed for centuries. They were asking whether childbirth had to remain one of the most feared experiences in human life. And that question would eventually lead to one of the most controversial medical battles the world had ever seen. The reason childbirth remained so dangerous for so long was not simply because medicine was less advanced. The deeper problem was that people did not fully understand what was happening inside the human body. Today, doctors can watch a pregnancy develop, monitor a baby's condition, and quickly identify many complications. For most of history, none of that knowledge existed. People saw the beginning and the end of childbirth, but much of the process remained hidden. When something went wrong, families often had no idea why it happened. This uncertainty allowed myths, traditions, and beliefs to fill the gaps where medical knowledge was missing. In ancient civilizations, childbirth was often connected to religion as much as medicine. Women prayed to gods and goddesses believed to protect mothers and babies. Special rituals were performed before labor. Protective objects were carried or placed nearby. Families hoped these traditions would improve the chances of survival. Some practices may have provided emotional comfort, but they did little to solve the physical dangers involved.
The human body was still facing the same challenges it always had. One of the biggest problems was that nobody understood infection. This fact alone explains an enormous number of deaths throughout history. Today, people wash their hands without thinking about it. Medical workers follow strict procedures to prevent germs from spreading. For centuries, people had no idea that invisible organisms could cause disease. A person could assist with a birth after touching contaminated surfaces and never realize they were carrying danger directly to the mother. Families often blamed bad luck, fate, or mysterious illness because they could not see the real cause. Another surprising detail is that many women spent labor in positions that were not always the most helpful. Different cultures developed different traditions. Some women delivered while sitting, kneeling, squatting, or standing. Others were encouraged to remain in bed for long periods.
These choices were usually based on custom rather than scientific understanding. Sometimes a position helped, sometimes it made labor harder. Yet people often continued following traditions because they had been passed down for generations. The authority of custom frequently outweighed practical evidence. During the Middle Ages and long afterward, midwives remained the primary experts on childbirth. Their knowledge came from direct experience rather than formal education. A skilled midwife might assist hundreds of births throughout her life. She learned patterns that books could not easily teach. She recognized signs of trouble and understood how labor usually progressed. Yet even the most experienced midwife faced a difficult reality. Knowledge could only go so far without effective tools. If a baby was positioned incorrectly, there were limits to what anyone could do. If severe bleeding began, options were limited. If infection appeared, there was often no reliable treatment available. Experience improved survival, but it could not eliminate danger. Families therefore developed an unusual relationship with childbirth. It was both common and frightening. Almost every family experienced it, yet nobody could predict how it would end. A woman who had already delivered several healthy children could still face serious complications during her next pregnancy. Success in the past offered no guarantee for the future. This uncertainty created a level of anxiety that modern audiences often underestimate. Childbirth was not a rare event. It happened constantly. Yet every delivery carried risks that remained largely outside human control. People naturally searched for ways to reduce pain and improve outcomes. Across different regions, women were given various herbs, drinks, and mixtures during labor. Some remedies contained ingredients that actually affected the nervous system.
Others had little medical value. Alcohol became one of the most common forms of relief because it was widely available and could dull awareness temporarily. Opium was also used in some places because it reduced suffering for certain patients. The problem was that these substances were unpredictable. A dose that helped one woman could harm another. Relief was inconsistent and often incomplete. Even when these methods worked, they did not remove the pain entirely. They simply made an unbearable situation slightly more manageable. Over time, another belief became deeply rooted in many societies. Labor pain was not just expected. It was often treated as something meaningful. Many people viewed suffering during childbirth as a natural part of becoming a mother. Because generations of women had endured it, the pain itself became accepted as normal. This belief had powerful consequences. If pain was considered natural, then reducing it seemed unnecessary.
If suffering was considered unavoidable, then searching for a solution appeared pointless. Entire cultures adapted to a reality that nobody believed could change. Yet there was a strange contradiction hidden inside this way of thinking. People accepted labor pain as normal, but they constantly searched for methods to reduce it. They created remedies, rituals, treatments, and traditions because nobody truly wanted suffering. Human beings were trying to solve the problem, even while claiming the problem could not be solved. This contradiction existed for centuries. Then medicine began changing faster than anyone expected. During the late 18th and early 19th centuries, scientists and doctors started making discoveries that transformed surgery. For the first time, serious discussions emerged about whether extreme pain itself could be controlled. At first, these conversations had nothing to do with childbirth. The focus was on operations and injuries. Yet hidden inside those medical experiments was an idea that would eventually change the lives of millions of women. If doctors could somehow prevent pain during surgery, then perhaps pain was not an unavoidable part of human life after all. A possibility that had seemed impossible for thousands of years was beginning to appear real. And once that idea entered the minds of a few determined physicians, the history of childbirth was about to change forever. For thousands of years, people believed pain was simply part of life. A broken bone hurt, a serious illness hurt, childbirth hurt. Nobody liked it, but almost nobody imagined it could be removed completely. Then, during the 19th century, something happened that seemed almost impossible. For the first time in human history, doctors discovered that a person could lose consciousness and feel no pain during a medical procedure. The discovery was so shocking that many people refused to believe it. Some thought it was dangerous.
Others thought it was a trick. A few believed it might change medicine forever. At first, these discoveries had nothing to do with childbirth. Doctors were focused on surgery. Before anesthesia, surgery was often a horrifying experience. Patients were held down while surgeons worked as quickly as possible. Speed mattered because every second increased suffering. Some operations were completed in minutes because pain was considered unavoidable. Surgeons developed reputations based partly on how fast they could work. Then came one of the most important moments in medical history. In 1846, an American dentist named William Morton publicly demonstrated the use of ether during surgery. The patient remained largely unaware of the pain while doctors completed the operation. News spread rapidly. Many physicians could hardly believe what they were hearing. For generations, pain had been accepted as an unavoidable part of treatment. Suddenly, that assumption was collapsing.
Doctors across Europe and North America began experimenting with ether. Some results were successful, others were less predictable. Yet one fact became increasingly difficult to ignore. Pain could be reduced. In some cases, it could nearly disappear. Among the people paying close attention was a Scottish doctor named James Young Simpson. Unlike many physicians focused primarily on surgery, Simpson spent much of his career caring for pregnant women. He understood better than most doctors how much suffering labor could involve. He had seen women endure exhausting deliveries that lasted for many hours. He had watched patients reach the limits of their strength. He knew childbirth could be one of the most painful experiences a human being might ever face. While others celebrated the impact of anesthesia on surgery, Simpson began wondering whether the same idea could help mothers during labor. This was not a small question. It challenged beliefs that had existed for centuries. Most people assumed childbirth pain was natural and unavoidable. Simpson was beginning to suspect that assumption might be wrong. In 1847, he and several colleagues started experimenting with different substances. One evening, they tested a chemical called chloroform. The story became famous because of what happened next. After inhaling the substance, the men reportedly became unconscious and collapsed. When they recovered, they realized they had found something remarkable. Chloroform appeared powerful, fast-acting, and easier to use than ether in certain situations. Simpson immediately recognized its potential. He believed it could transform medicine. More importantly, he believed it could help women during childbirth. Soon he began using chloroform with patients. The results attracted enormous attention. Women who would normally experience overwhelming pain could now receive significant relief. For some patients, the difference felt almost miraculous. News spread quickly. Stories circulated about mothers who endured labor with far less suffering than anyone thought possible. Yet what happened next surprised Simpson and many other doctors. The biggest obstacle was not whether anesthesia worked. The biggest obstacle was whether people believed it should be used at all. Opposition appeared almost immediately. Some doctors worried about safety because the technique was still new. Others feared unintended consequences. Those concerns were understandable. Any powerful medical treatment carried risks. But another form of resistance emerged that had little to do with science. Many religious leaders argued that labor pains served a purpose. Some pointed to long-established beliefs that suffering during childbirth was part of the natural order. If pain had existed throughout human history, they argued, perhaps it should not be removed. These debates quickly spread beyond hospitals and medical journals. Newspapers discussed the controversy. Community leaders shared opinions. Families argued among themselves. Some women welcomed the possibility of relief, others worried about trying a new treatment that few people fully understood. The discussion became emotional because childbirth touched nearly every family. Unlike many medical debates, this issue affected ordinary people directly. Simpson refused to back down. He believed the evidence was too important to ignore. If doctors had the ability to reduce suffering, he argued, then they had a responsibility to use it. He defended anesthesia publicly and repeatedly. He wrote articles, gave speeches, and challenged critics. The more opposition he encountered, the more determined he became. Gradually, more physicians started experimenting with chloroform and other anesthetics. Some reported encouraging results. Women who had dreaded childbirth began hearing stories that sounded almost unbelievable.
For the first time in history, there appeared to be a genuine possibility that labor pain was not permanent. The idea spread faster each year. Yet, despite growing support, the battle was far from over. Many influential people still opposed the practice. Critics continued warning that medicine was interfering with something fundamental. Supporters argued that relieving suffering was exactly what medicine existed to do. The conflict became larger than childbirth itself. It became a debate about progress, tradition, science, and human suffering. And before that debate could be settled, one of the most famous women in the world would unexpectedly push the argument into an entirely new direction. The discovery of anesthesia solved one problem, but immediately created another. Doctors finally had a way to reduce suffering, yet large numbers of people were not ready to accept it. From a modern perspective, this reaction seems difficult to understand. If a treatment could make childbirth less painful, most people today would assume it should be welcomed immediately. During the 19th century, the situation was very different. Many people were not debating whether anesthesia worked. They were debating whether it should exist in the first place. As news of chloroform spread across Britain and beyond, supporters and critics entered a fierce public argument. Newspapers published opinions from doctors, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens. Conversations about childbirth moved beyond homes and hospitals into public life. The issue became impossible to ignore because it touched nearly every family. One side argued that medicine had finally found a way to reduce unnecessary suffering. The other side feared that doctors were interfering with something fundamental. For generations, childbirth pain had been accepted as a normal part of life. Entire societies had built expectations around that belief.
Suddenly, a group of physicians was claiming that centuries of suffering might no longer be necessary. Not everyone welcomed that idea. Some critics worried that anesthesia would encourage doctors to become reckless. Others believed the risks remained too high because the treatment was still relatively new. These concerns were not entirely unreasonable. Chloroform was powerful, and doctors were still learning how to use it safely. Medical knowledge continued developing through trial, error, and experience. Yet many arguments had little to do with safety. They focused instead on whether labor pain had a purpose. Certain religious figures argued that suffering during childbirth should not be removed because it was part of a larger natural order. These opinions carried significant influence because religious institutions shaped daily life for millions of people. When respected leaders spoke against anesthesia, many families listened carefully.
The debate became especially frustrating for James Young Simpson. He believed critics were ignoring the reality faced by actual mothers. He had spent years watching women endure extreme pain during labor. He had seen exhaustion, fear, and suffering at close range. To him, the question seemed straightforward. If medicine could help people, then doctors should use it responsibly. Yet he quickly realized facts alone would not win the argument. Opponents were appealing to tradition, morality, and long-established beliefs. Simpson decided to challenge those ideas directly. He responded publicly and repeatedly. He argued that medicine had always attempted to reduce human suffering. Doctors treated injuries, diseases, and infections whenever possible. Nobody claimed those treatments were wrong simply because pain existed naturally. Simpson insisted childbirth should not be treated differently. His words attracted supporters, but they also attracted new critics.
The controversy grew larger with each passing year. At the same time, women themselves were not united on the issue. Some eagerly accepted anesthesia when it became available. They saw no reason to endure severe pain if another option existed. Others remained cautious because the treatment was unfamiliar. Stories circulated about unexpected reactions and possible dangers. Families often faced difficult decisions without reliable information. A woman might hear one doctor praise anesthesia while another warned against it. She might hear friends describe positive experiences while neighbors expressed fear. Childbirth had always involved uncertainty, and anesthesia introduced an entirely new kind of uncertainty. Yet something important was happening beneath the surface of these arguments. For the first time, Large numbers of people were discussing women's pain as a problem that could potentially be solved. That shift may sound small today, but it represented a major change in thinking. For centuries, labor pain had been treated as unavoidable. Now newspapers, doctors, and families were debating how much suffering was acceptable. The conversation itself reflected a new reality. People were no longer asking whether childbirth hurt. Everyone already knew that. They were asking whether women should continue facing that pain when another option existed. As more physicians gained experience with anesthesia, confidence slowly increased. Reports describing successful births accumulated year after year. Women shared their experiences with relatives and friends. Public opinion began shifting, although resistance remained strong in many places. Then an unexpected event accelerated the change. The turning point did not come from a scientific journal or a medical conference. It came from one of the most powerful families in the world. In 1853, Queen Victoria chose to use chloroform during the birth of her 8th child. The anesthetic was administered by physician John Snow, a doctor already respected for his medical work. The delivery was successful, and news spread rapidly. The impact was enormous. Millions of people paid attention to the choices made by the British monarch. If the Queen trusted anesthesia during childbirth, many families suddenly viewed the practice differently. Treatments that once seemed controversial now appeared respectable. Opposition did not disappear overnight, but public attitudes changed dramatically. What years of debate had struggled to accomplish, one highly visible birth helped accelerate. Doctors noticed the difference almost immediately. Interest in obstetric anesthesia increased. More women requested it. More physicians became willing to consider it. The argument was no longer taking place only among specialists. It was influencing society at every level. A decision made during one royal birth helped reshape expectations for countless future mothers. Yet the story did not end there. Anesthesia was becoming more accepted, but doctors were still searching for better methods. Some believed they could go further than simply reducing pain. They wondered whether childbirth could become almost entirely free from conscious suffering. That search would eventually produce one of the strangest and most controversial chapters in the history of medicine. By the beginning of the 20th century, anesthesia was no longer a shocking idea. Millions of people already knew that doctors could reduce pain during surgery and childbirth. Yet many physicians believed they had only solved part of the problem. Women were still experiencing difficult labors. They were still aware of much of the pain and stress surrounding delivery. Some doctors became convinced that medicine could go even further. They wanted to create a childbirth experience that women would barely remember at all.
That ambition led to one of the strangest medical experiments ever embraced by the public. The story began in the German city of Freiburg. Doctors working there developed a method that became known as twilight sleep. The name sounded peaceful and reassuring. The reality was much more complicated. The treatment relied mainly on 2 drugs. One was morphine, which reduced pain. The other was scopolamine, which affected memory and awareness. Together, they created an unusual effect. Women often remained physically active during labor, but later remembered very little or nothing about the experience. This detail made twilight sleep famous around the world. Newspapers reported stories about mothers waking up after delivery with almost no memory of giving birth. To many people, the idea sounded extraordinary. For thousands of years, women had expected childbirth to involve severe suffering. Now doctors appeared to be offering a way to erase the memory entirely. Interest spread rapidly.
Journalists traveled to Germany to learn more. Physicians from other countries paid close attention. Women began discussing the treatment with friends and family. Demand started growing even before most people fully understood how it worked. The strange part was that the reality inside some maternity wards looked very different from the public image. Twilight sleep did not always produce calm, peaceful patients. In many cases, women became confused, restless, and disoriented. Some shouted during labor. Some struggled against attendants. Some attempted to leave their beds. Others experienced vivid hallucinations and unusual behavior. Medical staff sometimes had to take extraordinary measures to keep patients safe. Certain hospitals used padded beds or special restraints because women under the influence of the drugs could unintentionally harm themselves. This created a remarkable contradiction. Newspaper readers imagined a gentle, almost magical medical breakthrough. Hospital workers often witnessed something far more chaotic. Yet despite these problems, public enthusiasm continued growing. The reason was simple. Many women focused on the final result. They did not remember the difficult moments. They remembered waking up with a baby and little memory of the pain. After centuries of fearing childbirth, that outcome felt revolutionary. The movement gained momentum in the United States after several journalists published detailed accounts praising the German approach. Articles described women who had apparently escaped one of the most painful experiences in human life. Readers became fascinated. Women's groups organized campaigns demanding wider access to the treatment. Public meetings were held, letters were written. Doctors faced increasing pressure to offer similar options. For one of the first times in modern history, large numbers of women actively pushed for a specific childbirth procedure. This development revealed how much expectations had changed. Only a few generations earlier, many people believed labor pain should simply be accepted. Now women were demanding medical intervention because they believed suffering could and should be reduced. The debate had shifted dramatically. Yet twilight sleep remained controversial. Some physicians praised it, others warned against it. Critics argued that the treatment created a misleading impression. They pointed out that the drugs often affected memory more than pain itself. A woman might later remember very little, but that did not necessarily mean she had experienced no discomfort during labor. Doctors disagreed about safety, effectiveness, and proper use. Medical journals filled with arguments. Hospitals adopted different policies. Families struggled to understand conflicting information. The public discussion became increasingly heated because childbirth was becoming more medicalized with every passing decade. Another unexpected consequence soon appeared. As hospitals promoted new technologies and specialized care, more women began giving birth in medical facilities rather than at home. This shift did not happen overnight, but treatments like twilight sleep helped accelerate the trend. Many families believed hospitals offered access to modern solutions unavailable elsewhere. Childbirth was gradually moving from a family-centered event into a medical setting controlled by doctors and nurses. That transition would reshape maternity care for generations. Meanwhile, some women who experienced twilight sleep reported positive memories and strong satisfaction. Others described confusion and frightening moments. The treatment produced dramatically different outcomes depending on the patient, the doctor, and the circumstances. As medical knowledge improved, many physicians concluded that the method had serious limitations. Over time, safer and more effective approaches emerged. Twilight sleep slowly declined, but its influence remained significant. The movement had changed expectations. It demonstrated that women were willing to challenge old assumptions about childbirth. It showed that patients could shape medical practice through public pressure. Most importantly, it proved that society was no longer debating whether childbirth pain mattered. That argument had largely been settled. The new debate focused on how best to manage it. Looking back, twilight sleep feels almost unbelievable. A treatment famous for removing memories became one of the most discussed childbirth practices of its era. Women demanded it, journalists promoted it, doctors argued about it, entire hospitals reorganized around it. Yet the strangest part was what it revealed about human expectations. Once people learned that suffering could be reduced, they became far less willing to accept suffering as inevitable, and that change in thinking would influence far more than childbirth alone.
At first glance, the story of childbirth anesthesia appears to be about pain relief. A doctor discovers a new method, women suffer less, and medicine moves forward. The reality was far bigger than that. Once doctors proved that childbirth pain could be reduced, they unintentionally changed how entire societies viewed medicine. Before anesthesia became common, many people accepted pain as a normal part of life. Suffering was often seen as unavoidable. A difficult operation was expected to hurt. Childbirth was expected to hurt. Recovery from illness was expected to hurt. People focused on surviving because comfort rarely seemed possible. Anesthesia challenged that way of thinking. It introduced a powerful new idea. If suffering could be reduced in one area of life, perhaps it could be reduced in others as well. This shift changed expectations across entire generations. Patients began demanding more from doctors.
Families became less willing to accept explanations that previous generations considered normal. Medical treatment was no longer judged only by survival. Increasingly, it was judged by the quality of the experience itself. Childbirth became one of the clearest examples of this transformation. As anesthesia gained acceptance, more women began expecting medical support during labor. Hospitals noticed the change. During the 19th century, many births still happened at home. Families often felt more comfortable in familiar surroundings. Midwives remained important figures within their communities. Yet as medical technology improved, hospitals gained advantages that homes could not easily provide. Doctors had access to equipment, trained staff, and specialized knowledge. Families began weighing new possibilities against old traditions. The result was a gradual but significant shift. More women started giving birth in medical facilities. This movement accelerated throughout the 20th century. By the time many countries reached the modern era, hospital births had become the standard experience for millions of families. That change alone reshaped entire healthcare systems. Maternity wards expanded, specialized training programs appeared. Obstetrics developed into a major medical field with its own experts, techniques, and institutions. None of this happened solely because of anesthesia, but anesthesia played a critical role in making the transformation possible. It helped convince people that childbirth belonged within the growing world of modern medicine. Another consequence appeared inside the medical profession itself. Doctors began paying closer attention to the experience of patients. Earlier generations often focused almost entirely on physical outcomes. If a patient survived, the treatment was considered successful. Anesthesia forced physicians to think differently. They now had tools capable of changing how people experienced medical care. This encouraged further research into pain management, comfort, and patient well-being. New drugs were developed. New techniques emerged. Entire areas of medicine expanded because doctors recognized that suffering itself deserved attention. The effects extended far beyond childbirth. Surgical procedures became more advanced because anesthesia made longer operations possible. Doctors attempted treatments that would have been unthinkable during earlier centuries. Hospitals became places where increasingly complex procedures could be performed safely. Medical innovation accelerated because pain no longer imposed the same limits it once had. In a strange way, efforts to help women during labor contributed to broader changes throughout healthcare. The story also influenced public attitudes towards science and technology. For centuries, childbirth had been shaped by tradition, custom, and inherited knowledge. Anesthesia represented something different. It demonstrated that long-accepted realities could change through scientific discovery. Many people began viewing medicine as a source of progress rather than simple treatment. Expectations rose steadily. If doctors could reduce childbirth pain, perhaps they could solve other problems once considered permanent. This optimism helped drive support for research and medical education throughout the following decades. Yet the transformation was not entirely simple. As childbirth became more medicalized, some people worried that families were losing control over an experience that had once belonged primarily to women and local communities. Midwives often found themselves competing with physicians for authority. Hospitals established rules and procedures that sometimes reduced the role of family traditions. New technology offered important benefits, but it also shifted power toward medical institutions.
This created debates that continued for generations. Different countries responded in different ways. Some embraced hospital births rapidly. Others maintained stronger traditions centered around home deliveries and midwifery care. The discussion never completely disappeared, because childbirth remained both a medical event and a deeply personal experience. By the middle of the 20th century, however, one fact had become clear. The world had changed permanently. A woman entering labor now had options that her ancestors could barely imagine. She could receive pain relief developed through decades of research. She could benefit from medical knowledge accumulated across generations. She could rely on treatments that simply did not exist for most of human history. Millions of families came to view these possibilities as normal. That may be the most remarkable part of the story. What once seemed miraculous eventually became expected. People quickly adapted to a new reality and forgot how different the past had been. Few stopped to consider that for thousands of years, mothers faced childbirth without any reliable way to reduce suffering. Fewer still remembered how controversial pain relief once seemed. The debate that had divided doctors, religious leaders, journalists, and families slowly faded from public memory. Yet its impact remained visible everywhere. Modern maternity care, modern hospitals, and modern expectations about medical treatment all carry traces of that earlier struggle. What began as an attempt to ease one of humanity's oldest forms of suffering ultimately changed how entire societies thought about medicine itself. And by the time the transformation was complete, the world looked very different from the one that existed before a handful of determined doctors dared to imagine that pain did not have to be accepted forever.
When people think about the history of childbirth, they often focus on one question. They wonder how much pain women experienced before modern medicine arrived. After hearing this story, the answer becomes clear. The pain was real, but pain was never the entire story. The larger reality was uncertainty. For most of human history, childbirth combined suffering, fear, hope, and risk into a single event. A woman could enter labor healthy and strong, yet nobody could guarantee what would happen next. Families lived with that uncertainty for thousands of years because they had no alternative. They accepted dangers that would seem shocking today because those dangers were part of everyday life. What makes this history remarkable is not simply how difficult childbirth once was. What makes it remarkable is how long people believed that nothing could be done about it. Generation after generation inherited the same assumptions. Labor pain was considered natural. Complications were considered unavoidable. Suffering was treated as an ordinary part of becoming a mother. Many people disliked that reality, but few imagined it could truly change. The idea that pain itself might be controlled seemed almost impossible. Then a small number of doctors began questioning assumptions that had survived for centuries. They looked at suffering differently. Instead of asking how women could endure childbirth, they asked whether women should have to endure it at all. That shift in thinking changed everything that followed. The discoveries of ether and chloroform did more than introduce new medical tools. They challenged one of humanity's oldest beliefs. They suggested that pain was not always a fixed part of life. A problem once accepted as permanent suddenly appeared solvable. That realization spread far beyond childbirth. It influenced hospitals, surgery, medical research, and public expectations. Yet the most surprising part of the story may be the resistance these ideas encountered. Looking back, it seems obvious that reducing suffering should have been welcomed. Instead, the first advocates of anesthesia found themselves defending a concept many people considered controversial. They faced criticism from respected leaders, skepticism from fellow doctors, and fear from ordinary families. The debate revealed something important about human nature. People often adapt to difficult realities so completely that they struggle to imagine alternatives. Even when a better option appears, acceptance can take years or even generations. Childbirth became one of the clearest examples of this pattern. The struggle over anesthesia was never only about medicine, it was also about tradition, authority, and changing expectations. As those expectations evolved, society changed alongside them. Women increasingly expected medical support during labor.
Families became less willing to accept severe suffering as inevitable. Doctors expanded their efforts to improve patient experiences. Hospitals transformed from places of last resort into centers of specialized care. Each development built upon the changes that came before. One decision led to another. One breakthrough created opportunities for the next. The result was a transformation so large that many people today rarely think about how recent it actually was. It is easy to forget that anesthesia in childbirth was once a radical idea. It is easy to forget that many mothers throughout history never had access to anything similar. Their experiences belonged to a world that operated according to very different rules. They entered labor with fewer tools, less knowledge, and fewer options than families possess today. Yet their stories helped shape the changes that followed. Every difficult birth, every medical experiment, every public debate contributed to a larger process that unfolded across generations. Another detail often goes unnoticed. The history of childbirth is usually told through doctors, discoveries, and medical breakthroughs. Those elements matter, but they are only part of the picture. At the center of the story were millions of women whose experiences forced society to confront uncomfortable realities. Their suffering made the problem impossible to ignore forever. Their willingness to try new treatments encouraged further innovation. Their expectations helped drive changes throughout medicine. Even the controversies surrounding childbirth reflected a larger truth. The people most affected by these decisions were the very people whose experiences revealed why change was necessary. By the 20th century, the world looked dramatically different from the one that existed before anesthesia. Hospitals expanded. Medical knowledge advanced.
New generations grew up expecting levels of care their ancestors could barely imagine. Yet the distance between past and present can make history seem unreal. Modern childbirth still involves challenges, risks, and difficult decisions. The difference is that families now face those challenges with resources created through centuries of effort and discovery. What once seemed impossible gradually became ordinary. In many ways, that is the strangest part of the entire story. One of humanity's oldest forms of suffering became so much easier to manage that people stopped thinking about the battle required to make that change happen. The debates faded, the controversies disappeared, the breakthroughs became routine. Yet beneath every modern delivery room lies a forgotten history filled with fear, determination, disagreement, and discovery. It is a history that reminds us how recently the world changed. For thousands of years, mothers were expected to endure one of life's hardest experiences with little help and few options. Then a handful of people dared to imagine a different future. What followed was not simply a medical revolution, it was a complete change in how society understood suffering itself. And once that change began, there was no returning to the world that came before. It was one of the most feared moments in a woman's entire life. Today, if labor becomes too painful, doctors have ways to reduce the pain. Hospitals are prepared for emergencies. Medical teams monitor both mother and child every minute. But for thousands of years, none of that existed. A woman could spend hours in labor, sometimes days, sometimes much longer. There were no reliable painkillers, no anesthesia, no guarantee that either she or her baby would survive. Many women entered labor knowing there was a real chance they would never leave the room alive. That sounds shocking today, but what is even more surprising is that for centuries, millions of people believed this suffering was simply part of life, not a medical problem, not something to fix, just something women were expected to endure. And when doctors finally discovered a way to block the pain, the reaction was not celebration, it was outrage. Religious leaders attacked it, doctors argued over it, newspapers debated it. Some people even claimed that removing childbirth pain was wrong. The fight over anesthesia became much bigger than medicine. It became a battle over who gets to decide how much suffering is acceptable. And the strangest part of all is that one of the biggest turning points in this story did not happen in a laboratory or a hospital. It happened during the birth of a baby whose mother happened to be one of the most famous women on earth. To understand how childbirth changed forever, we first need to see what women actually faced before anyone knew how to turn the pain off.